Hello, I'm Philip Luck, the Director of the Economics Program here at CSIS. Today we're going to be talking about trade policy. On July 31st, the administration issued an EO updating its tariff rates that it's putting on many trading partners, updating those that it originally put on Liberation Day in early April. These tariffs are a significant increase in tariff rates across many different partners, taking us to average tariff rates that have not been seen since the Great Depression in the United States. So this is really a sea change in U.S. trade policy. Today we're going to go through not only how those tariffs have changed, how that's likely to affect the U.S. economy, how it might affect our partners, and then more broadly, the strategic impact on integration of the U.S. economy and the PRC economy with our major trading partners. So let's first start by looking at the tariff rates that were announced back in April, as well as the tariff rates that were released at the last day of July. So we have here some of our major trading partners, and both the increases in the tariff rates in April, as well as the increases in tariff rates just on the last day of July. So we have these sorted by the high rates of tariffs as of July 31st, and as you can see here in red, some of the countries that have seen the biggest increases in their tariffs in terms of the threats of tariffs are Brazil, Switzerland. Canada has increased its tariffs, or the tariffs on Canadian goods, from 25% to 35%. Mexico has had a reprieve, but they're now being on tap for a 30% tariff if they don't come to an agreement. There has been an increase, a tariff of 25% put on Indian goods as well. One of the big outliers in terms of decreases in their tariff rates have been countries such as Vietnam. So Vietnam was originally targeted to get a 46% tariff on Liberation Day back in April. Via negotiations, they've reduced those down to 20%. Further down, we see some reductions from partners who have negotiated, from the EU, the Philippines, Japan, and the South Korea, as well as the UK. But even these partners who are really close trading partners, and partners who we have very good trading relationships with, even they have now tariff rates that are above 10%. 15 to 20%, which again should be noted, the historical average tariff rate for the U.S. economy is about 2.2%. So these are an order of magnitude higher than old tariff rates. And again, we haven't really seen tariff rates this high since the 1930s. So we've about a century since we've seen rates this high. So next we're going to look at what does this mean for welfare of these economies? So what we have here is from a recent paper that's forthcoming in the Journal of International Economics, including an affiliate from our program. These are the welfare calculations, or essentially the income changes for partners due to those Liberation Day tariffs. Now these are not updated to the most recent tariffs, so Vietnam here is being threatened with a 46% tariff rather than the 25% tariff that it's gotten, but these give you a good indication of what would the impact be of these tariffs on our partners. And not surprisingly, whether you look in a world where there is no retaliation from our partners, which is in blue, or if you look at a world where there is retaliation by our partners, which is in red, regardless of those two situations, pretty much all of our partners will lose as a result of this. Their incomes will go down. And you can see all the way at the top, there's the United States. And as you can note in blue there, we actually would see a 1.13% increase in income as predicted by the models as a result of these tariffs, if there is no retaliation from partners, right? So this is an important thing to note. These tariffs are not good for the macroeconomy in the sense that they create distortions, they'll increase prices for consumers, they will take resources away from more productive industries and put them towards less productive industries. All that said, though, there are benefits to the U.S. economy in aggregate that can be gained from these tariffs, but those are what we call beggar thy neighbor gains. These are gains where we're really just getting transfers from our partners to us. So these are not aggregate welfare gains. These are basically us taking things from others. And as you can see, even in the world where we benefit the most possibly from this, where we get a 1% boost in our aggregate GDP, we're getting that as a result of a really quite expansive decrease in income from a lot of our partners, creating both economic and geopolitical issues. The next thing I want you to see is how this might affect our relationship with these partners and how that might overlay with the relationship with the PRC. So what I've laid out here in about 6 graphs is basically the value added, or the value that from the U.S. imports, as well as the value added from PRC imports from some of our key trading partners. So the way to think about this graph is, for an export from Brazil, how much of that value of an export from Brazil is embedded value from U.S. products, right? So how much they rely on the U.S. in terms of their exports to third markets. In blue, you have the U.S. value, so you can see the U.S. economy has the U.S. has become a more and more important trading partner to Brazil, not only in its own final consumption, but for Brazil's own ability to export products. More and more Brazilian products have in them embedded U.S. content. But that's also true of the PRC. So the PRC content of Brazilian exports has also been rising over that period. So the relative importance of the two is relatively similar. You can see the similar dynamic here, but in a very different sort of story of Canada. Canada, for obvious reasons, is massively reliant on the U.S. For its value of its exports. Again, this is largely because the United States and Canada should really be thought of as one giant ecosystem, and it's not nearly as reliant on the PRC. The Eurozone has become reliant on both the United States and the PRC over time more and more. Switzerland as well as Mexico. Now, there's a different story for some of our partners who we've either created agreements with or we have threatened with more tariffs. So, for instance, South Africa is one country where we've seen that these tariff pressure has been ratcheting up. And you can see here that now, as we look to the red on the second half of this, South Africa is more reliant on the PRC for the value of their exports than they are the United States. So the strategic alignment between South Africa, the United States, and the PRC has been shifting towards the PRC over time. Now let's move away from, some of these Western Hemisphere, European, and African countries. Let's move to the Indo-Pacific. This is that same basic graph, but for Australia, Indonesia, Japan, Korea, South Korea, the Philippines, and Vietnam. Now, these are all trading partners where, with the exception of Australia, where the United States made efforts to ink framework agreements during the period between Liberation Day and the beginning of August. And you can see why the United States, the administration, might have prioritized these countries, because these are countries, all of which are in a very important theater geopolitically, and these are all countries where the dependence on the PRC in terms of their economic relationships has grown incredibly quickly, and in most of these countries now very much outpaces the relationship of the United States. That's certainly true of even treaty allies like Japan and South Korea and the Philippines, but we can of course see this really dramatically in the case of Vietnam. Vietnam's reliance in terms of their exports on U.S. inputs has stayed relatively flat over that period, whereas from the period of 2010 through 2020, the increase in the Vietnamese reliance on PRC inputs has really increased dramatically. Zooming out, I want to talk more broadly about countries overall. So here, rather than looking at the time series graphs of these different cases, I'm just going to look at, for every single country, 2 snapshots. There were different countries' reliance on the PRC in the U.S. in 1995, and their reliance on the PRC in the U.S. in 2020. So in the blue dots here at the bottom, the light blue dots, this is economic relationship in 1995. On the horizontal axis here, this is how much these countries rely on the United States. The vertical axis is how much they rely on the PRC. So these blue dots being near the horizontal axis tells you that for all trading partners, basically all countries in the world, back in 1995, these countries, their exports relied very heavily on U.S. inputs. So the U.S. economy was incredibly well integrated into these economies. Our prosperity was tied to their prosperity and vice versa, and our economic relationships and our economic incentives were very well aligned. Fast forward to 2020, that has really changed. Almost all countries in the world are now above this 45-degree line, which basically means these countries rely more on the PRC for inputs than the United States, right? So this is not just about final goods production. This is not just about whether we import a widget from the United States or a widget from the PRC. This is saying for everything that a country produces, where does the value of that thing get produced? Where is the inherent value, the underlying value of those products? And this tells you something about the overall economic relationship. And the reason I bring this up is because as we increase tariffs on other countries, as we increase the barriers and we more industrialize or more reindustrialize, we're increasing the incentive for countries to rely on us less, which basically means we're increasing the degree to which this movement towards the PRC for a lot of countries will become exacerbated. So as a result of both the Liberation Day tariffs on April 1st, as well as these newly announced changes in the EO at the last day of July, we are really ratcheting up our sort of protectionism. We're putting up high barriers to global trade for both our consumers and producers, and we are putting in place incentives that will lead to less strategic alignment in terms of economic incentives between ourselves and our partners, and in doing so, pushing our partners more towards economic alignment with strategic rivals like the PRC. So thanks so much for your time, and looking forward to continuing this effort to understand trade policy going forward.